Welcome to Developing Empathy with Comics and Graphic Novels. This session will be moderated by John Shableski, Chief Ambassador for LibraryPass, in conversation with our guests, Jerry Craft, Tracy Edmunds, Grace Ellis, Talia Hurwich, Rossie Stone, and Anthony Zuiker. Today's webinar is presented by LibraryPass, which curates high-interest, immersive digital content that helps libraries expand their reach and engagement without breaking their materials budget. Our Comics Plus platform offers unlimited simultaneous access to more than 20,000 age-appropriate digital comics, graphic novels, and manga. Learn more at LibraryPass.com or ComicsPlusApp.com. And now, enjoy the webinar.
Okay, everybody, welcome. My name is John Shableski. I am the ambassador for all of this stuff for LibraryPass and Comics Plus. Our panel today is presented by LibraryPass, which curates high-interest, immersive digital content that helps libraries expand their reach and engagement without breaking their materials budget. Our Comics Plus platform offers unlimited simultaneous access to 20,000 and more age-appropriate digital comics, graphic novels, and manga. You can learn more about this at LibraryPass. And for the folks who have already signed on, Guy mentioned earlier that we will be taking questions from the chat. So I will be monitoring that on my side here. The panel today, I think, is perfectly timed for what's going on in our environment over the past several years about developing empathy using comics and graphic novels in the education and the library space. And how do we learn? The summary is, how do we learn about the lives of others? Usually through books and movies that help immerse us in other people's histories, cultures, and experiences. The authors, educators, and publishers on this panel are going to talk about their perspective in this process. So how does this kind of storytelling evolve? What role does an editor have in the process, or a publisher, in bringing these stories to the audience? And how does an educator apply these stories in their approach to social and emotional learning? And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of you. We're going to go in alphabetical order. Jerry Craft, we're going to start with you.
Okay. So my personal introduction. So I'm Jerry Craft, author and illustrator of the graphic novel New Kid, which is the first graphic novel to ever win a Newbery medal. My follow-up book, Class Act, came out a couple weeks ago. And I've been self-publishing since 1997. So my first book was in 2014 when I never thought I could get published. And so I'm honored to actually be here and being traditionally published after 30 years of struggling to become that.
Thank you. All right, next up, Tracy Edmunds.
Hi, I'm Tracy Edmunds. I'm a former elementary classroom teacher and reading specialist, and now I am an educational writer, and I create materials for teachers and students.
Okay, and Grace is next.
Hi, my name is Grace Ellis. I'm a comic book writer. You might be familiar with the book Lumberjanes, which I co-created and co-wrote. I also did Moonstruck for Image Comics. My latest book is Lois Lane and the Friendship Challenge, which is a middle grade book from DC.
All right. And next up, we've got Talia.
Hi all, I'm Talia Hurwich. I'm a former middle school teacher. Currently, I am a doctoral candidate at NYU Steinhardt, where I study graphic novels. Specifically, I've looked at graphic novels and science identity, as well as graphic novels and feminism. And I've co-written a book with Meryl Jaffe on how to teach graphic novels in the classroom, and I'm really excited for this panel.
All righty, and fresh onto the screen with us from Scotland is Rossie Stone.
Hi there, guys. You'll have to forgive the Christmas jumper as it's very cold in here in Scotland right now. But it is a pleasure to be here. My name is Rossie Stone, and I'm the creator and founder of Deco Comics Limited, and we turn, and I turn, school information like maths and English and history, science, you name it. We turn that into comic strip stories to provide an alternative way to learn and remember information, as well as a much more fun way.
And last but not least, with the best view of the ocean at this moment, Anthony Zuiker.
Hi, I'm Anthony Zuiker, co-founder of Zuiker Press. We are a publishing house that does graphic novels about real kid stories of real issues. Publish about 4 of those a year. Our first 8 novels are divorce, cyberbullying, autism, racism, body image, school shooting, autism, bullying, suicide, and transgender. Those are our first 8. And my wife's an educator for 17 years. You may know me as the creator of the most successful TV show in the world, CSI, Crime Scene Investigation. We combined our efforts between education and storytelling, and now we give books away to schools for free as our initiative.
Excellent, thank you, sir. Welcome everybody. And since this is about, and thank you, Anthony, by the way, your books tie in perfectly with this conversation about social and emotional learning. We're going to start with the 2 educators on the panel immediately. And one of the biggest questions about this medium and the format is, what is it about the graphic novel that works so well in helping the reader connect with the stories? And Tracy, do you want to take the first swing at this?
Sure. You know, really, graphic novels are books and they tell stories just like in any other medium. But the difference between a textbook with prose or poetry and a graphic novel is the art, the images. The art and the text work together to tell the story. So when it comes to creating empathy, students can see the characters. They can see facial expressions. They can see body language, and that helps them understand what the characters are going through. We're showing, we're not just describing. And I think that's one of the main reasons that graphic novels are great for developing empathy.
Talia?
Yeah, what Tracy said is spot on. I just want to kind of also highlight that to become empathetic, it's not only learning about the other, but learning about the self and learning about how the self responds. And graphic novels, through use of images that are static and sequenced, are very good at invoking emotions, dissonance, happiness, all of these things that are to some degree heightened often, as I've seen in research. And it's a very good way to kind of explore, well, why are you feeling that way? Why do you feel kind of icky about this? And through that, you can understand self and how yourself interacts with another.
All right, so next up, and I want to go with our publishers because from what I know about both of you, publishing in this space is a very personal endeavor. Anthony, I want to start with you. What brought you to comics and graphic novels for publishing?
Well, it was an accident, really. I mean, my middle son's high-functioning Asperger's, so he wanted to write a book about his life, just to tell kids what was wrong with him, he said. And I said, well, let's do a book to tell kids what's right with you. So we did publish the world's most expensive father-son project called A for Autism. When we were done, he didn't want to publish it. He was too freaked out because his face was everywhere. So my wife and I decided to keep going. And she said, there's plenty of kids out there that have plenty of issues that want to be heard. And next thing you know, we started with John Shableski for Zuiker Press in 2018. And here we are on book 9 and 10, some short 2.5 years later. I think the thing about our books is in the very back, it has a real picture of the author. And when kids pick up our books, they say to themselves, one important thing, I'm not alone. And when you see this is my true story, they're curious of other kids' stories. And I think that's what's working for Zuiker Press.
And Rossie, similar emotional involvement and investment in this process for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love what Anthony said there about taking the angle that his son was coming at and then saying, let's make a book about what's right about you, not what's wrong about you. And that is hugely powerful. I'm dyslexic, and I grew up through school being at the bottom of the class and believing for quite a lot of time that I was stupid or that there was something wrong with me. And the first teacher to make a big impact on my life was the first teacher who, rather than just giving me a bad report card on everything I was doing wrong in class and how far behind I was, it was the first one who said, I really like teaching him. I love his enthusiasm. I think he's trying here. He could be better at that if he took this different approach, and it was positive. And that gave me such a huge confidence boost. I think with dyslexia, for example, the biggest issue is not the difficulty with reading and writing, but actually the difficulty that comes with the lack of confidence and feeling that there is something wrong with you. So that's where I felt, that's probably the big core reason behind me starting publishing, was that throughout my school life, I struggled, but eventually I found a way by turning my revision notes, my study notes, into comic strip stories, which used visuals and used more than just words. They used the structure of storytelling and distinct visuals to remember all my information by. Suddenly I wasn't at the bottom of the class anymore. I wasn't struggling with reading so much. It helped get me my first grade A in an exam. It helped me understand information and remember it so much more vividly. And just the fact that that was something that really helped me, I felt that I really wanted to bring that to other people. You know, other people out there, there's so many other students who go through school thinking that there's something wrong with them, like they are a problem. But really the way I see it is, when I got an A in that exam, it was the same information everyone else had to learn for their test. I had just presented it in a way that made better sense to myself. And, you know, I don't have a problem with the way school teaches, just that it's the only way it teaches, primarily through words and reading and so on and so forth. So by making a comic publishing business and producing comics that produced important school information, but by using pictures and storytelling, as Tracy was saying, something that connects you with empathy and gives you so much more than words, I felt it could help a lot more people like myself. And people beyond that. You know, since being released, the comics have helped children with dyslexia, autism, ADHD, and anyone else who struggles with conventional learning, where it just relies on words rather than any of the other strengths that there are out there.
And before I let you go on that one, you wound up doing TED Talks, right?
Yes, I've done 3.
Did you imagine when you started this that that's where you would, one of the things you'd end up doing?
Not at all. I thought I would do a few fun little comic strips and a few fun subjects, and that would be that. And you know, my goal set out was, if I can make a difference to 10 people, you know, that's 10 whole worlds I'm helping. And I know from firsthand experience how horrible it can feel to just be experiencing that in one world. You know, I was known as the stupid kid for a long time. You know, revision and studying periods were a very hard time for me. I'd feel like such a failure and such a disappointment. The fact that I was struggling with this bare basic skill of reading. So yeah, that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to make something that could help a few other Rossies out there connect with information in a bit more of a natural way. I didn't realize that it would snowball into this publishing company.
Right. Now, to continue on with this, basically setting up the foundation and how we got to this point, Grace, I want you to talk about what brought you to the medium as a storyteller. Why comics over text or prose?
Well, there are a lot of really unique strengths that comics have. I think we touched on them even a little earlier. The fact that it's a visual medium, but the images are static. So when you experience a comic book, you're taking it totally at your own pace. It allows for you as a storyteller to emphasize a lot of different things. It's a lot easier to get inside a character's head, which is really good for empathy, because you can like linger on a face for longer. And like there are techniques for like making sure a reader will spend more time with the panel, stuff like that. That's like deep craft stuff. But I really like it because of how unique it is in terms of like the types of stories that are best told in comics, let alone the fact that like if you want to like explode a spaceship, you don't have to budget for exploding a spaceship, you know, stuff like that.
Right.
I love comics for that.
So Jerry, you've been at this for at least a couple weeks, maybe.
A little bit.
But you've always been, as long as I've known you, you've always been a storyteller. But why comics? What brought you to that?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing is I wasn't a reader, but anything but Marvel Comics. And I remember being in class where my teachers would confiscate our comics. You know, they said that they would rot our brains and that they were pretty useless. But I knew, I mean, so much of my early vocabulary is probably better than most other kids in my class, because especially reading Marvel Comics, I knew Armageddon and Annihilation and Uncanny and Macabre, and you know, so that was always something that I was attracted to. comics were more fair as far as people who look like me, you know, to have a Black Panther or Black Lightning or someone like that, as opposed to a lot of the classic books that, you know, unfortunately had to deal with a lot of, you know, slavery and civil rights and misery and suffering. So just like when Anthony was talking about showing what's right in life, I didn't see those in quote unquote real books, because it was all about the struggle and misery of African American life. So I definitely gravitated more towards comics to actually have a little bit more fair. And then as I got older, I created the comic strip called Mama's Boys, which just showed kids as regular kids. And then to finally come up with New Kid, and having reluctant readers like myself being able to read and identify and see the visual cues and, you know, things that they may not necessarily get from prose novels. You know, like if you literally draw someone that's 2 inches big, it shows that he's feeling isolated, or he feels less than, or he feels smaller. And that some kids are visual thinkers and visual learners. And I think that that is, you know, graphic novels are kind of like the perfect format to bring kids like how I was into being real readers.
You know, I want to, that leads me to a question I didn't have on the list for you guys, but oftentimes we hear people talk about this is a thing for reluctant readers or challenged readers or different learners. That seems to be not as true as a lot of people would imagine. Tracy, can you speak to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, no doubt there's an advantage in reading graphic novels and comics for kids who maybe aren't as fluent in reading text, because, and one of the things I love about it is it gives those kids an opportunity. It makes the stories accessible to them. So even if they're not really fluent, fast decoders, they can read a graphic novel and get the same story as everyone else. And they can practice those skills of inference and plot and character and all those other things, maybe in a way they couldn't with a text. But they're also great for every reader, and even for high level readers, because they're multimodal, which means you're using 2 different parts of your brain for the visual and for the text. There's a lot that goes into it, and you know, it makes your brain really work. There's so many levels of meaning that these wonderful creators embed in these stories. And so even for really high level readers, it can be a challenge to pull all of that out of a story.
So Talia, why does this medium and this format appeal so strongly to younger new readers?
Well, I think that it engages the creativity and the playfulness that is involved in analysis. I think that when we go through an English language arts class years and years, or even for like a few months, we start to kind of know what the deal is. Okay, so we're gonna look for metaphor, we're gonna look at the character, we're gonna look at theme. We're gonna do these things that are important skills and continue to get developed. But when you start to expand modalities, it starts to require students to draw on different sides of them, different areas of creativity. As Grace says, think about that pacing and think about how time dilation is such a funny thing when you're in graphic novels. And why might someone want to slow something down or speed something up? Beyond that, it's a lot more, to some degree, tactile. You're flipping the pages more. You're more active. And in that activity, you're more engaged, you're more attentive. And I think that, on top of a lot of other elements that, you know, images are engaging, they focus us, absolutely, same way that movies are in its own way. I think those are some really strong reasons for why graphic novels can be so very engaging to students.
I'm going to go now with our publishers, Anthony and Rossie. I know both of you have found yourself working in the school space. Oftentimes when I do workshops at schools, I have a line of kids that want to show me their art. And I'm going to start with Anthony because the stories you publish are really intense personal stories. What has been the feedback from teachers and students when you're in that environment?
First of all, we're the world's most friendliest company because in my 3 years of publishing, I never charged a school for a book. So every one of our books is free because we raise the money in the community and they write us big checks. We give swaths of books to the schools, which is super cool. There's oftentimes—
Hold on. Can you say, I know there are people who are looking at the screen going, what? Can you say that again?
Well, I just, I don't run around the school districts asking for money to buy books. It's too much red tape and I'm a busy guy. So what we do is we talk to corporations, private donors, and ask them to send contributions to their state or their city or their region for a tax write-off. And then we go ahead and ship class sets all over the country for free. That's been our business model. It's great because I can get more books in the hands of kids when they're free versus trying to charge them $10 a book and go through all the red tape, either not on the library list or, the librarian has no money, or she has to use her own credit card to get reimbursed. It's just too much of a dance for me. So we go ahead and we ship about $40,000, $50,000 in books every 3 to 6 months.
Wow.
I'm just fundraising. Now, COVID's been horrible for us because obviously it's hard to ask for money during COVID. But here nor there, I remember being, this is our cyberbullying book, and I remember asking fourth graders how many kids are victim of cyberbullying, and they're like 9, and all 37 kids raise their hand. So that's a shocker because we believe this is sixth and over. But even fourth graders deal with this kind of stuff every single day at a very, very intense level. Kids were crying in the classroom. But I think one thing our books do is it gets kids to raise their hand and start sharing stories. I think that's the biggest win for our company.
Wow. Rossie, I'm guessing you've run into more than a few people who've had your same experience.
Well, yeah, I have. It's very humbling whenever you go to a school and you just see, what I do with schools is that I will come there, I'll tell them of like how I struggled at school and all that, and then I'll show them some examples of how they can turn any information into a different way of communication. So I won't just use comics, I'll use turning it into a picture or turning it into something to do with music. Like, I tell them how I learned my Shakespeare quotes for my English exam by singing it to my favorite Dire Straits songs, which gives you a window into my old man taste in music. But I show them all kinds of techniques that can work, and it's all about using creativity and what you find fun. It's about using entertainment as a tool, and comics are a great form of sensory entertainment. And then when I give the task to the kids to work on for themselves, for them to turn the schoolwork into something creative themselves, the ones who, all of them will come up with brilliant ideas. I'm so impressed and amazed by the creativity of every child in that room, and I've yet to be at all, I wouldn't be disappointed anyway, but I've yet, I've not even been needing to be put in that situation. But incredible ideas and confidence come from the children with dyslexia. They will come up with these huge elaborate ideas, and they will tell me of like how they struggle at school. They find it really hard to read, and they were really worried when they got assessed and found out that they had dyslexia. And yet this very detailed comic will come out, or this very creative game that they've made up on the spot that involves a few pieces of paper, and it's kind of like, I couldn't explain it here, but you get everything from board games to fortune tellers to all sorts of things there, and I'm just amazed. So yeah, I run into a lot of experiences there, and yeah, I'm there to talk about the comics, but actually why I end up doing those workshops more and more is because I get reminded of why comics work for some of these kids. And it's not because comics are the answer, that's the only thing they can read. It's just that comics are a great way of encouraging that great nugget of creativity that they have in their mind. And if comics can, as an example, help encourage more children in schools to think like that and feel that their creativity is okay, and it's okay to use that in the school context more and to use as a solution to overcome difficulties with reading barriers. And as Jerry says, can actually be a great gateway into proper reading itself. Then that's where it feels like my comics are worthwhile. And ironically, it's not because of the books themselves.
Right. Thank you. And now I've got a similar question for the two authors. And it's about identity and representation and how the response has been. when people discover more about you as a creative. Grace, do you want to take the first swing at this one? I'll talk with Jerry after that.
Oh, geez. Okay. So Lumberjanes was my first book. Lumberjanes has a bunch of LGBTQ characters in it. I was very naive when we started. I just kind of like, this was the book I just wanted to do. I wasn't really aware of the other books on the market.
And they just, real quick about that, it's just that they happen to be LGBTQ.
Right. I mean, there's basically, when you think about representation, it's not like a hard binary, but there's basically two types. There's like, this is a story about being like having this identity. And then there are stories where that's just like part of the rest of the story. And I think that they're both important in a lot of different ways. That's not really the question though for right now, but just something to think about.
Right.
But I think I just didn't know that there weren't any other books really like that. But pretty much immediately, I'll tell you a brief story, which is the book launched at Emerald City Comic Con, and the rest of the creators and I were tabling with Boom Studios, the publisher. And the doors opened on the first day. We had not sold a single book yet, and a bunch of cosplayers came in and ran over to the table dressed as the characters because they saw them on the cover and they were like, we know that we're going to love this. And I think that was the moment where we realized that we had done something a little bit different. Just the fact that there was anything that someone who was LGBTQ enjoyed this kind of story could pick up and like see some sort of version of themselves in. I think it was really meaningful for people.
Right. And Jerry, for you, actually, I want to share a story with you guys real quick. We had done an event at an elementary school in the Chicago area, and mostly Black student population. And Jerry and Jeffrey Hayes are doing these drawing events for the kids. And these three little boys were running through the library and pumped the brakes and stopped and were watching Jerry. And it was, I realized at that moment, these kids were seeing somebody who looked like them doing that, which was really pretty. And you were drawing SpongeBob, by the way, Jerry, if I remember right.
Yeah.
With New Kid, have you encountered these kids who were you at that age?
Oh, absolutely. Like I have had so many Dr. Phil moments where either moms or dads or teachers or librarians will talk about, I mean, this one woman came to me, I think I was at TLA, and she had bought a copy of New Kid and given it to, a young African-American boy. And he read it, and while he's reading it, literally starts sobbing because he had just never seen himself in a book before. And, so many times where it's like, this kid hasn't read a book in my class all year and he's read New Kid 3 times, or, he's not read a book and he came to me and said, oh, Mr. So-and-so, you have to read this book tonight, promise me, so we could talk about it in the morning. And, one of the biggest things about, obviously winning the Newbery, it was a personal goal that I will always cherish. But the fact that now, like, I get letters where people are saying that, dad goes into a comic book store with his kid or a bookstore, and he goes, Dad, can I get the graphic novel? He goes, no, you got to get a real book. And now this woman tweeted at me. She said, well, I said, hey, sir, do you know that a graphic novel just won the prestigious Newbery medal? And he goes, oh, all right, son. Well, in that case, get whatever you want. And that's just kind of a cool thing to, in a weird Star Wars thing, I feel like I brought balance to the Force in the sense where this kid that was always told that graphic novels were just a waste helps to kind of give it the respect that we all kind of deserve and we know that it deserves. So I couldn't be more honored to play a part in that.
Well, that actually helps me segue into the next question I want to ask each one of you an answer for is, how do you convince a parent in very short terms? How do you convince a parent that reading a graphic novel is okay? Jerry, you just answered, but I want to, I'd like to hear from Tracy on this. And because we're also talking with teachers and librarians here today who are going to deal with this moment And it's never when you're prepared. It's always at the end of the day, you're just trying to put your stuff away and get out the door. And suddenly there's a parent there who's arguing with you that this kid has this junk in their hand. How do you deal with that? Trace?
Well, I think Jerry's right in that, awards really tend to catch people's attention, and it's a great way to convince people. So I was going to talk all about how great they are. I'm going to give you a list, okay? The Mouse won the Pulitzer Prize. March won the National Book Award. We have a Newbery Medal for New Kid. There are Caldecott Honor Books, Prince Award books, Coretta Scott King Award books. Jerry's is another one. Jean Yang was the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. We've had 3 MacArthur Fellows, Alison Bechdel, Jean Yang, and Linda Berry. If that doesn't say that this is real reading, I don't know what does.
And add to that, when Raina Telgemeier's Guts premiered, it was the best-selling book in America, not best-selling graphic novel, but best-selling book. So that's pretty amazing what she has also done.
One of my favorite educator moments, I had a 7th grade teacher stop me, and I was doing a workshop for this school, and she was in a panic. She was like, "This is wonderful. These kids are all excited about this, but I'm worried about my son." And I said, "Why?" She goes, "He's into Pokemon. He's 16. I said, "Well, it's okay. It's hypermath, it's mythology, it's all these other things." And I said, "And I know a guy who teaches mathematics of Pokemon at MIT. And suddenly the world lifted off of her shoulders and she felt so much better. I said, "He will move out of the basement eventually, and he will become a productive human being. You don't have to worry about that." Talia, you've had these same kind of conversations as well, correct?
Yeah, to some degree. I've been teaching, because I'm a graduate student, I've now been teaching in college, at the college level. And
but even with that, you still have academics who may argue against that, correct?
Oh, absolutely. The course that I teach in is a great books course. And so to include anything from even the 20th century requires a bit of an argument. And really, I think that what has worked the best for me is you don't think of encountering people as an encounter or as responding. It's the start of a conversation. And so what you do is take a breath, don't freak out. The fact that the parent is coming up to you in the first place is a great sign. They're not automatically shutting you down. And what you do is you start to have a conversation with them, establish that you're a bibliophile, establish that you love reading in all shapes and forms. You can speak their language and talk to them about, okay, what do you think is the goal of reading? Why do you want your child to be well-read? And from there you pivot, because graphic novels are a great way to have kids being well-read and thoughtful. And there's so many different ways that they really enhance what is done with the classics. That, convince them that this is not an either or. That, don't worry, your kid will also read what you think of as real books. And get them on your team as opposed to get them convinced.
I'm going to go next to Anthony on this one, because I think you have an advantage oftentimes going into these schools to have these conversations, because you do straddle the worlds of television and now publishing. What's the most interesting conversation you've had with a parent or teacher about using this medium?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the CSI thing is cool to school, so they want to talk to the CSI guy, which is just my gimmick to get me in the school, right? But I want to address this issue about parents, novel, is it for me, is it not for me? I remember being confronted by a parent about this very same issue, about it being a comic, and my response is, I didn't write the book for you, for just your son. I wrote it for you also. This is Goodbye, Story of Suicide. This young girl died 6 years ago. I never even met her, but I had to write her story posthumously. And the tips we give in her narrative about suicide is very informative, not just for a child, but more importantly, way more informative for the adults to see the warning signs. When the kid is listless and doesn't want to go to class or wants to go to class early, or and all these things. So these any parent who gives me pushback about a graphic novel, I'm like, have two answers. Number one, this is not a comic of the 70s. And number two, I didn't just write this book for your child. I wrote it for you. Get involved.
You know, it's interesting you make that point about it's not a comic of the 70s, because oftentimes it's that kind of just hazy remembrance of what comics were when they were little kids or much younger. And I think that's very interesting and key on that one. Rossie, do you have similar encounters? Have you had anybody come up and kind of get in your face about the idea?
I thankfully haven't had anyone like confront me over it. But I mean, I respect Anthony's attitude to just sort of like give him a direct answer back, you know. I have encountered it. I know it's there. I know, for example, there are schools with parents who are very skeptical about graphic novels, and there are schools themselves who still see comics as not a proper way of reading. But you know, without meaning to sound one note, I do want to explain my end of that through my personal experience again, because I, you know, really struggled with reading. Reading was a chore. I really wanted to engage with the story and the facts that were all written down in books. But what I saw first, because I'm very visual, was a big block of text. And what eventually got me over that hurdle of finding reading quite intimidating, and got me learning vocabulary and got me into the habit of reading and more comfortable with reading, was comics and graphic novels, and also story-based computer games where there was no voice actors and you had to read what was going on. You know, there's nothing wrong with having a story that involves some reading, but it also involves pictures happening. You know, it's, for me, a graphic novel is like a storyboard. It's combining film and literature together in a wonderful way. And so I say, if a parent did confront me about that, my answer to it would be, reading graphic novels can be a stepping stone. It can be that essential stepping stone you need to get them to reading books that are more sophisticated or complex or more wordy. More sophisticated isn't right to say, but you know, at the end of the day, if you want to get someone into classical music, probably the best idea isn't starting them off with Mozart and Beethoven all the time. Why not start them off with classical music from a computer game they like, and then with a film they like, or a TV show, and work their way up, get them interested in the instruments and the chords, and then eventually they will start to find Mozart interesting because they'll understand the context more. And it's the same as far as I'm concerned with reading. That's certainly how I got into reading, and now I can read books for fun now. Not as fast as some other people, but I can do it now. But I couldn't have done it without the comics and graphic novels that were there to pave the way for me. And I know that there's lots of other people who have got a similar story there.
John, can I say one quick thing? So one of the things that I always think is incorrect what people do, like with me, when they took my comics away and said that comics were dumb, it wasn't like I said, oh, in that case, let me read Faulkner. I started playing video games. You know, because if you're telling me that I can't enjoy reading, like any like fun reading was like contraband that I had to be ashamed of, and I just started playing Atari, you know? So there is a much smaller leap from going from, you know, guts to reading again, real book than it is from not reading anything. You're not going to go from not reading anything to just all of a sudden like, oh, Anton Chekhov. Yeah, I've always been interested in that. You know, but with the comics, you know, and all these books, I know when I write prose novels, I put the same, if not more work into writing a graphic novel. So you're not cheating, you know, you're not getting the Cliff Note version. So I just think that the adult, you know, the ones that are really holding on not to get kids to read are actually doing them a disservice.
You know, I was going to say real quick, I'm going to steal from Rossie, because your mention of classical music, so many of us don't realize Warner Brothers and Bugs Bunny and those cartoons gave us classical music because it was a public domain and they could use that for their soundtracks, which was awesome. Real quick, I want to make note that we are seeing your text coming in, your messages. Terry Smith works at a public library, currently leading a virtual graphic novel book club for middle schoolers. We just started with New Kid and then El Defo, and we talked about the Graveyard book yesterday. Next book is going to be illegal. And we had a small but mighty group, but the fact that we wanted to talk with kids about New Kid made us start the book club. How cool is that? And she says, thank you, Jerry Kraft. Looking forward to Class Act. And for those people who are putting the comments in here, thank you very much. We are looking at those. Not all the questions are going to be answered via this session right now, but we will be following up to get those answers to you for those solutions as well. In this process of teaching new readers are the new teachers who are on this, who are watching this show for us right now, or the session, as well as the librarians. Some words of wisdom on where you guys all began. Anthony, what was your learning process on this? What were the things that we all steal from somebody somewhere?
I should have been in the feather business, because this book was just too heavy. That's for sure. Look, I knew nothing about graphic novels whatsoever, how to be a publisher at all. I just had a need to tell stories to help children and find a way to leave some level of legacy behind that was beyond CSI. And that was just the very, I sit with these kids, I talk to these parents, I interview them for 3 days, I write everything down, I write the book back in their words, I see how it heals a family. We're there for the tears, we're there for the laughs. And, look, to get a 14-year-old to tell you their story, very personal story, is tough. To get Lauren to tell you about 4 best friends losing their life in the shooting in Florida. These aren't easy things to do with kids. They're very sensitive, but they are so, they want to share their story so bad to help other children that when we actually complete the book and give it back to the family, it really is a cathartic experience. My worst day of CSI doesn't match, my best day of CSI doesn't match my worst day on Zuiker Press. So it's just super fulfilling. And to do 10 books with real kids and have these extended families has just been a blessing for us.
So technically, how similar is script writing for a TV series and writing for a graphic novel?
It's a whole other ballgame. I don't draw, so I'll write the script in their voice first. Then I'll do an illustrated script where I'll do a paragraph per line, so they know what to draw. Look, it's still storytelling, still connections, still emotion, still twists, still turns, still surprises, all those things like a CSI script in this. So the only difference is I don't direct for CSI and I don't draw. So it's just kind of cool to see it brought to life by people far more talented than me.
Right, gotcha. Hey, Grace, from your perspective as a storyteller, what are the things that you've seen in stories, especially along this theme of empathy that we're talking about, that have caught you, those heart-wrenching kind of moments, those moments in stories that stop you?
Well, we've got Jerry right here. I've got Jerry's book right here. There are so many moments in that book specifically that are just like, they just, it's like getting stabbed in the heart, I think that this is the perfect book for generating empathy, because there's such a variety of characters and they're all going through something so specific, and you just understand so well where they're coming from. And I think that the fact that it's a comic book specifically really helps drive that home. And there's a lot you can do with prose. There's a lot you can do on TV and in movies, but you would have to do a lot more describing to make those things happen in a prose book. Whereas you can just have someone in the background of a comic book, and that happens a lot in New Kid, where you see how they're reacting, and sometimes the background reactions are the thing that really, it's like a gut punch.
And the difference there is that you can hold that image.
Right. You can spend as long as you want just getting punched in the gut over and over.
I remember
it hurts so good,
when Anthony was working on the first book, we were doing a bunch of research on telling stories of autism and spectrum. And there was this great post from this mom who said her son had told her, "Mom, I'm just looking at a pile of letters on a page, but when I see a comic, it all makes sense. I can understand their faces. I can see what they mean," which I thought was really pretty powerful, and then is stuck with me ever since.
Well, and also, John, also, when you think about divorce, you think about a splash page, right? Talk about words in an image, that makes perfect sense. This is the most powerful thing about this book. Am I the reason? Am I the reason for the divorce?
How many kids ask that question?
That's what the kids are thinking. Am I the
Right.
reason? Yeah.
Right. And if you can write that out, and that like is a powerful line, but seeing someone react, like have that thought, it really drives it home in a unique way. It's just a different type of literacy, learning how to read a comic book. And I should say there are people who literally don't know how to read comic books. I have encountered them. It's very bizarre to me. But if somebody's never seen a comic book, they literally don't know what order to read panels in. And I think even there was one of the questions that someone sent in about manga, about comic books being read from back to front. I mean, if you've never encountered that before, that's like something new you have to learn. So it's totally worth looking into it, at least for that, just so you have like a foundational understanding.
Real quick, I want to touch on that. Thank you, because that when I looked at that question, I was like, okay, that's a different conversation. That's a different process. For people who are not familiar with this yet, manga does read backwards, like Hebrew, and you literally flip the book, but you feel like you're rewiring your brain because the images are in a different order, but you're also forced more so than in a graphic novel setting to look at the words and look at the pictures, look at the expressions. But I'm gonna take it back to the image that Anthony put up there, is that proficient readers or those people who are specialists in text will skim and only read the text. And they understand somewhere midway through the book that they've missed something, right? But when you stop at that image and you see her sitting there on the bed thinking it's her fault, there's so much more power to that, right? And then for Tracy and Talia as educators, do you get the chance to have those moments with your colleagues to say, this is how this really works? How do you aside, the only thing I can think of is holding that book and like Anthony just did, holding that up and saying, okay, stare at this for a minute. Is there a comparison for you, Talia?
I mean, I think to some degree, modeling is really helpful, not just showing an image, but modeling the analysis that comes out of it. I think manga actually is a fantastic example of something that can help teach empathy, because not only is the directions different, facial expressions mean different things, which means that it requires a lot of analysis to look at the faces and say, okay, what does this mean? And when you're thinking internationally, when you're thinking about the world, different cultures have different facial expressions. We seem to assume that everything that we do is the same everywhere, and that's just not true. And so manga is a really good way of getting that analytic skills, getting that cultural sensitivity going as well. But yeah, I mean, to your question, how do you show? I think that a lot of it is showing the work that's been put out about these graphic novels. The fact that there is a whole field called comic studies is, I think, a really good, compelling, quick argument that one can make. But nothing's better than just actually opening a page and saying, this is how I read it. And this is a skill that takes time to develop. And students should get that skill.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it can be, teachers and academics that say it's not real reading, they've never read one. So what I do is I actually talked to Scott McCloud about this, and this was the book that he said, to find the book here, start with a book that doesn't have any words, so that they are forced to read only the pictures. And this book, The Arrival by Sean Tan, is a masterpiece. It is a wordless graphic novel that talks about the experience of immigration in an imaginary world. And it will connect with every reader, from very young children to adults. And I honestly would say to a colleague, go and read this book and then come back to me and we'll talk about it, because they don't understand the power of sequential image until they look at something like this. So I think it's a good place to start for someone who's never read one before. It takes away what you were talking about, John, is that tendency to just read the words and get to the end and have missed most of the story. So I think that's one way to go about it. And then the other thing with colleagues is, you know, everybody wants research. Everybody wants data. There's a lot of research out there that supports this. And just for your information, on my website, tracyedmunds.com, if you go to resources, I have lists of research. I have pages you can print out and hand to people that tell all about why these are great. So go and take advantage of that.
All right, real quick, I want to point out we've got about 10 minutes left. At the end of this, we're going to have 30 seconds of shameless self-promotion. So these folks get to talk about their books and their projects that they've got coming up. But I did get a prompter from Raquel Ryan, who manages all of our school accounts. She reminded me that all of Anthony's books are in our catalog right now, so you can find them, as well as Rossie's books. So we'll tee that up for you as well. Looking forward, we've checked off a list of all the awards and all the recognition that has come. Where do you see, each of you, where do you see the next part of this going? What is the audience for what we're doing? Let's go to Rossie.
I'm afraid you're going to have to repeat the question very quickly because you sort of froze there for me for a few seconds there. No, that's all right.
So where do you see this going now? And from what your experience has been, where do you see this taking you?
Well, I have no idea. I had no idea where it was taking me 5 years ago. But, you know, where I hope it's taking me is down a path where I can work with more visual and sensory communication to tell stories, connect emotions, and get people thinking about important things, and helping, really for me, using not just comics, but also other sensory mediums that might sometimes be overlooked, like animation and music and so on, to connect, to help connect people to information they struggle to access in other ways, but also to just get them engaging with more stories, more ideas and so on. I just really wanted to add to Tracy's excellent point there, where she talked about the arrival and how that has no words, and yet it paints such a vivid picture of comics' power of connection. Comics do so much more than just, and comics just as an example, they do so much more than just show a picture to go with the words that are being written with it. It's what you do with that picture, having the composition, the way you lay out that picture, the way the characters are positioned, the lighting, the way the lighting reflects what's being said. Yes, the words are very powerful, but to have all those other elements that a comic can bring to it just really, really can connect someone to an emotion they didn't realize, or a really difficult thing to explain through words alone. And that's what I want to keep doing with Deco, do more of that, but not just through comics. Hopefully I can expand to other mediums as well.
Anthony?
Thank you. I was just responding. I mean, look, I already bought Jerry's 2 books on the call, so already. There's going to be a new kid. Look, there'll be a new kid app. There'll be a new kid cartoon. Probably a new kid motion picture, an animated series on Netflix. I just think all of these will end up, probably a lot of these things will end up in other mediums, and then it'll revert back to, you know, the book. I mean, everybody says to me, you know, why don't you do this stuff on comic psychology where you read the book on the phone? I kind of like, personally, I'm old school. I'm 52 years old. I like holding a book in my hand. I like turning the page. I like smelling the ink. I love getting back to books. But to answer your question, in this cross-pollination, multi-platform world, these awesome narratives of everybody on this call will have natural extensions in other mediums that will help engage kids. And I'm just glad that it would start with a tangible book.
Grace?
Well, sorry, I couldn't figure out how to click a button. My hope for the field of comics is that we stop having this conversation, stop having to have this conversation. Most adults in America don't read books. So the fact that adults will look down on children who want to read anything at all is just kind of ludicrous. Comics is not a genre, it's a medium. A comic book can be anything. I mean, the difference between Mouse and a Raina Telgemeier book could not be greater. So my hope is that we all start working on books that are for a broader audience. My next book is for adults, pretty clearly. And I think that this is probably a conversation I will be having more and more as that book comes out. So
I hope so.
I hope so too. I just think I am so frustrated by adults who think that comics are only for kids. You know, the classic, like anytime any newspaper runs a story about anything comics related, it's like, boom, pow, comics aren't for kids anymore. And it's just like, oh my God, they never have been just for kids. I just want to shake them, you know? So my hope is that everyone starts reading comics and we start like moving past this idea as a culture that it's just for kids.
That boom pow makes whatever hair I have left stand on end.
Oh my God, it's just, oof.
All right, Jerry, you get a swing at this one.
So I had a teacher say that, again, a kid in the class had never read anything. It's like, you have to read this book. But because she didn't grow up with comics, she couldn't read the graphic novel. So imagine a so-called reluctant reader now teaching his teacher.
How cool is that?
How to read. I mean, you talked about something that gave me chills when they first, like, oh yes, Miss So-and-so, let's sit together and I'll show you how to read this award-winning narrative and I can teach you. Like, now the student has become the teacher. And I just thought that was so amazing. Like the boost that it probably gave that kid was absolutely amazing. Well, I'm starting to see more books like now. Kwame Alexander, his crossover was turned into a graphic novel. Jason Reynolds' Long Way Down is now a graphic novel. Laurie House Anderson had a book that's now a graphic novel. Walter Dean Myers, so I think the people who are really looking at more what the kids need as opposed to what you think, giving them that, oh, you need this spoonful of nasty castor oil, I think that they are really doing the right things. And like, look, let them read what they want. My kids, love Xbox. So I bought them a subscription to Game Informer so they could read about video games. But that kept them reading. So there was never a lull of them reading. So I never had to go back and say, oh, I'm going to take away the games because they were always reading. So I think that slowly but surely, I mean, there is still some people digging in for that real fight. But I think that me and Grace and Anthony and Tracy and Talia and Anthony, I think we're going to be like the Avengers and we're going to come for them.
That's a good place to be. All right, we're going to go to Tracy and then Talia and then 30 seconds of shameless self-promotion.
I hope that we all become fluent in comics. I hope that not only the kids, but the teachers and the parents learn the specific language that comics uses so that everyone can understand and enjoy the stories, not just the text, but the images and using language that comes from visual arts or from film and television and zoom and line and color and framing. And also the language that is very specific to comics, panels, gutters, word balloons, fonts, all those other things. I just want to see everyone become literate so that we can all enjoy the comics medium even more.
Talia?
I actually want to build off something that Grace said. Most adults don't read books, but we're reading more than ever. And we're reading more than ever on our screens. And when that happens, there's almost always an image or two or three involved. And what it means is that language is changing, as language does. And so what I'm really looking forward to is I'm actually looking forward to graphic novels that look less and less like comics. I'm looking for graphic novels that are going to really push the boundaries of how you pair image and text and question the conventions in ways that are going to engage us in new, different ways and push forward our ability to communicate with each other. I think that's a pipe dream, but it's not that far away of a pipe dream, and I look forward to it.
Maybe when the kids that are in kindergarten right now become adults, we call them just books. All right, ladies and gentlemen, awesome. As promised, it is time now for 30 seconds of shameless self-promotion. We're going to go in alphabetical order. We're starting with Jerry Craft.
All right, so I just pulled this up so I could read it. So this says the Spring Hill Company, the banner run by LeBron James and Maverick Carter, has signed a first look deal with Universal Pictures, and they have 3 projects in development. The first being New Kid, based on the first graphic novel ever to win the Newbery Medal by Jerry Craft.
How does your head not explode reading that?
After I sign off.
Congratulations.
Thank
All right,
you.
Tracy.
Yeah, you can find me at tracyedmunds.com and on Twitter as at Tracy Edmunds. I have a lot of free resources on my site and videos from other panels and teachers showing how they use comics in their classrooms. I also have resources on Teachers Pay Teachers to help you use graphic novels with your kids. And I've written a whole bunch of classroom guides and lessons for Andrews McMeal's line of kids graphic novels.
All right, Grace, you're up.
Oh man, okay. Lumberjanes, Monster Fighting Girl Scouts. Moonstruck is Werewolf Baristas. Lois Lane and the Friendship Challenge is like baby journalism. It's super cute. My next book is coming from Abrams. It's a Patricia Highsmith historical, based on a true story graphic novel. I can't tell you anything more than that, but you should read The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith as like a pre-reading. It's great.
Cool, thank you. All right, Talia, you're up. I know you already held your book up once, but go ahead, hold it up longer.
Here it is again, worth 1,000 words. It's about using graphic novels to teach visual verbal literacy, primarily within English language arts, but we do have a chapter on social studies, math, and science as well. If you go to the book's webpage, there is also a full list of graphic novels that are sorted by topic, age. It's a really good place to start if you're looking for a book to use. Currently, I am finishing up a dissertation, so that'll be read by about 4 or 5 people, and then who knows what's going to happen next. And yeah, you can always email me, talia.hurwich@gmail.
And Rossie, you're next.
So Deco Comics are a wacky, cartoony series of comic strips that turn all sorts of school subjects into comic strip stories, and they focus on using humor and jokes and silly pictures to help communicate information and be fun to remember. We have 12 of them all together. You can go into decocomics.com to go and check them out. We made a lot of them online for free for the COVID-19 period. And if you're a library and you have any other important issues you want to have covered in comic formula, we do make those as well. This is a little comic about fighting the stigma of mental health. So that's what we do. Go to decocomics.com and see what we can do for you.
All right, and Anthony.
I put my website, zuikerpress.com, in the chat room, in case you know how to spell it. If your kids suffer from divorce, cyberbullying, body image, racism, or scared about a school shooter, autism, contemplating thoughts of suicide, or transgender, all you have to do is go to zuikerpress.com, email me. I have about $12,000 left for this donation season, and I'll send you as many books as you want for free.
Thank you very much, all of you guys. Thank you so much for this. By the way, you can also go to LibraryPass.com. Our contact information is there. You have questions about any of this or anything related to comics, please do not hesitate. If we don't have the answer within 5 minutes, I know 20 people who know the answer to that, so we will hit those resources for you. Thanks again to all of our guests on the panel today. Thank you for also joining us. And this will stay up as long as they allow us to. I want to thank also our fine folks at LibraryPass. Our entire team is wonderful for making this possible. Gila Charles for running the board for us this afternoon. And if you want to learn more about LibraryPass, which we want you to, and Comics Plus, be sure to visit us at LibraryPass.com today. And that is a full 63 minutes, folks. Thank you very much. Cheers.